Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us on episode 31 of SCOTONOMICS. The first thing I'd like to do, as always, is introduce my co-host, Kieran van Sweden. Hi, Kieran, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Yes, I'm very well. And tonight we also have a special guest, Cameron. So I'll bring you on, Cameron. We'll just check your sound as you say hello. Nice to see you. Welcome.
Hello, can you all hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, it's good.
Oh, it's working. Thank goodness. How are you all doing?
Yep, we're very well. Thanks for joining us. Well, tonight we're going to be speaking about the job guarantee, and what we're going to do first of all, before we go into the real kind of specifics and detail of how this would work in Scotland, is we're going to hear from two economists that we've interviewed previously about the job guarantee, and they're going to talk about it from this kind of MMT perspective and also talk about it from America. It's a brilliant little 7 minutes, and then we'll get stuck into this conversation with Kieran and Cameron. But thanks everyone for joining us, and I hope you're going to enjoy tonight's show.
I should define what a job guarantee is. I keep talking about it, but I'm not sure how much your viewers would know it. So it's at least in the US context, the job guarantee is a program that MMTers have been advocating for, where the government offers a job to anyone and everyone who's willing and able to work for a fixed wage and benefit plus benefits, and that effectively puts a floor under wages. So it effectively creates a minimum wage, because if you have unemployment, your minimum wage is basically zero, right? So it creates an effective minimum wage, and it the funding is federal, but it can be decentralized, where local governments and NGOs can be involved in the implementation. But the good thing is that it automatically expands if you are in a situation like COVID or a recession, because there are now more unemployed workers who are eligible for the job guarantee or who want to work in the job guarantee. And then in a recovery, the opposite happens. People find work in the private sector and the pool shrinks. So in that case, you don't even need to bill an infrastructure bill for people to get a job. The job guarantee ensures that as long as they're unemployed people, this federal spending will expand, or if there's more unemployed people, the federal spending would automatically expand, and then and vice versa. So it's an automatic stabilizer for the economy.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I've written about for Modern Money Scotland with my colleague Cameron there. So it's something that I feel very passionate about, and I am going to bring it forward to the SNP conference, which is coming up as well, that we run a pilot here in Scotland. That's my plan. So yeah, would you like to comment on the job guarantee scheme?
Yes, it's a very simple idea, and it works well on so many different levels. And the idea is based on this. The fundamental building block to me is the fact that the market system will not create a job for every willing worker. All right. We can create plenty of goods and services. It's not as if we have a shortage of houses, but we have homeless people. It's not as if we have, a shortage of food, but we have hungry people. And so the problem is that, and to the private sector, labor is a cost. It is not something they want to maximize. So, okay, well, let's decide this. Let's let the private sector do what the private sector wants to do, minimize costs, put in self-checkout lanes, or whatever else it is, robots and so forth. But let's not leave the job of since full employment isn't their job, then it's the government's job. And so what we do is we say that anyone who can't find a job in the private sector, don't worry, we have got plenty of social problems that need to be addressed. When we run out of social problems, then what a glorious day that will be. And of course, at the very top of the list is the existential threat that is climate change. I mean, the private sector is never going to address climate change, never. And so what would be I was just thinking about it. I think about it a lot. And I was walking back from class this morning thinking, somebody who's out of work right now could plant a tree. I mean, the things we could do, clean up neighborhoods, that there are so many. And there's a fantastic book by Pavlina Chernovit. What is it called? I don't know, Job Guarantees in the title somewhere. But she talks all about this. But what we do is we say, okay, private sector, you do all the restaurants and so forth, and do all the cost cutting you want. That doesn't matter. Meanwhile, in the public sector, what we do is we guarantee jobs. And because of the way, especially in the United States, we don't have to worry about spending dollars. We can always finance this. The shortage is resources, not money. Money, even in the private sector, banks make up money. I mean, so it's not like there's a real honest to goodness shortage of money. And here's the great thing now. Oh, but won't that cause inflation? Yes, it would if we kept employing people past the point of full employment. If we kept trying to expand it. But the thing about the job guarantee is it automatically stops. You know, if this is your amount of, sorry, I'm trying to figure out where my hands are. This is your amount of unemployment. Then this is also going to be proportional to how much government spending there is. And so as it clamps down to here, there's still government spending, but the government spending that was necessary to get to here and nowhere else. All right. Now, there's always going to be inflation somewhere, but remember what I said about inflation. Always check to see who's gaining and who's losing before you decide it's good or bad. But the job guarantee is so simple and so brilliant. I mean, rebuild infrastructure. There is a major bridge. I don't know if you guys know this, across the Mississippi River on Interstate 40 in the U.S. that goes from, I don't know, might go from the West Coast, but I do know that it goes to my in-laws in Tennessee. So when we drive from Texas to Tennessee, and we go over this huge bridge over the Mississippi River that, been driving over it. I went to school at University of Tennessee, driving over it for years. It had an inspection the other day. It was about a month ago. And the inspector got on his cell phone and said, "You have got to close the bridge right now. Not a single other car can pass across here. There are cracks in the bridge." And there's no reason that should ever happen. There's no logical reason. So it may be shut for a year. This major bridge, it's at Memphis. This major bridge between Arkansas and Memphis is shut down. Now there's another bridge south of town, but of course that, I saw the other day, the governor of Tennessee was talking on some talk show, talking about how much different industries is saying this is costing them right now. And I mean, again, childcare, elderly care, all these things that could be addressed with a job guarantee, and the pride people would take from, we are social. My view is we are social animals. This whole thing about we live as individuals, and that's a bunch of crap. We choose to live as individuals as much as baboons do. They don't. They live together in a troop, and so do we. So we want to contribute. We want to feel like we're valuable to people. And being on unemployment and being told you're bad because you're on unemployment is not conducive to this. And so, I don't know, I could go on and on. I'll stop there. But that's the basic idea with the job guarantee is let the private sector do what it's good at, lower prices. But let the government do what's moral and right, and that is create jobs for these people who have the willingness to work, and we have enough stuff for them.
Okay, so that was a summary from two American economists. Karen, first, what did you think of that? Was that a good summary, and is there anything you want to add to start this conversation?
So yeah, I mean, I think the probably what a lot of people maybe don't really realize is the idea of the wage floor and the job guarantee as a stabilizer, and I think Yeva, reinforces that, and that also, unemployment essentially means that you're starting off with a zero wage, whereas the job guarantee will essentially create a minimum wage. Yeah, so John makes a really good point that, taxation equals unemployment. Fundamentally, by having a taxation system, you essentially create unemployment. So, the private sector cannot be held responsible for, it's not the private sector's responsibility to create employment. So if you're creating taxation, then you also have the aligned responsibility to ensure that people are able to pay that taxation through employment.
Okay, great. Cameron, what was your thoughts? Good summary, anything you want to add?
So I think definitely from a policy and a macroeconomic perspective, I thought there was a lot of great insight from both of your guests. I think I can't really add much to it. I think from what I want to discuss tonight, obviously I want to take a more policy perspective, which I'll dive more into later on. But I think the two perspectives I like to discuss is from a general policy perspective. Job guarantee as a theory has actually been around you can say as early as the 17th, 18th century, it was, you know, the right to a guarantee was part of the French Constitution, and has been continuously brought up in many government programs and many government policy aims. The problem is how you actually achieve it, and that's where you actually discuss this. And I think, you know, talking about the history of the job guarantee, the big thing I love to discuss is who I absolutely adore, is Sadie Tanner Mosel from the Civil Rights Movement in America. And she was what I'd say the first person to really perceive the macroeconomic perspective and the theoretical perspective of the job guarantee and really put it together. And that's important because, you know, she was America's first ever Black economist. She was part of the Civil Rights Movement. She was part of bringing unions together within the private sector. And she saw it as pushing for more bargaining power and the protection of labor and organizing and barring picket lines, and also better treatment of women workers, LGBT workers, all minority groups. And I think that fundamental underlining of the job guarantee is the protection and the strengthening of the labour, and really trying to get that grip of the capital which they work on and they should rightfully take possession of, is really fundamental to the job guarantee. And the other perspective, which is a policy we'll go into later on, I think we look a lot on labour as on the job seeker, but my analysis more recently, I've been really keen to look more into what about the service providers, what about the employers, what's their role in the huge barriers which is for the job seeker. Because the job seeker, a lot of governments put a lot of behavioural elements on the job seeker. It's a job seeker who must seek employment. But actually, these barriers are actually created often by the employer and the service provider. And I feel like that's an area we can really discuss a lot more on, which I'm sure we'll discuss on later in the show.
Yeah, no, that is a really interesting perspective. There's two sides of that coin, isn't there? Karen, one thing I wanted to mention, and it was something I've heard before, kind of levelled at the job guarantee, and John kind of touched on it a little bit about this idea of crap jobs, and the job guarantee is just about crap jobs. Hey, we need some trees. It's pouring the rain. Go and plant some trees. I'm sure you've heard this this point before. What do you have to say to that? What type of jobs are we guaranteeing?
Well, I think, you know, also at the end, John makes a really important point that, you know, if we run out of social problems, that will be a great day. So, you know, and the big problem we've got right now, looming, it's the grey rhinoceros that everyone's trying to go, oh, is climate change. So, you know, we're not running out of social problems fast. We need an awful lot of things to do. I think the concept that it would just be filling holes in the road is really misguided. There are so many things that need to happen, but it also shouldn't be confused with a civil service job that's a permanent civil service job. Because I would say in Scotland, in the UK in general, the civil service is quite small in comparison to our Scandinavian neighbours. So we have about 16.3% of our working population involved in the civil service in the UK as a whole. In Denmark and Norway, it's closer to 30%. I think 30% of your workforce working to run the country and ensure that the country runs smoothly seems pretty fair to me. So I would say in an independent Scotland, we should be looking to expand our civil service. And then if you have people who the private sector has not managed to provide a job for, then you know, as a government, you have a responsibility to make sure that there is a job for people. So, you know, looking to help people is first, what's their skill set? Where do they want to live? Do they want to stay in their local area? Do they have children in a school? You know, do they have an elderly relative that they need to look after and look into? So, you know, they've had a job before, which is perhaps, you know, they've based their whole life in a certain area. What do you just expect them to move to the private sector and move away from their child's school or an elderly relative? You know, I would say the government has a responsibility to make sure that that person stays in that area and uses their skill sets until such a time that perhaps the private sector will then provide a job that's perhaps better paid. But, you know, I think the thing of keeping people within their local area is important as well.
And we, as you said, we won't run out of jobs, especially if you're looking to address the climate crisis. And you could list 100 really good jobs in manufacturing and the circular economy and insulation and engineering and all these types of jobs.
But I should also emphasize that these are transition jobs. They're not meant to be, the job guarantee jobs are not meant to be necessarily permanent. They might end up being permanent, but really they're supposed to be a transition between losing your job in the private sector and either going to another private sector job, or you go into the civil service if there is availability for a job there. So it's not meant to be, some sort of fill-in for the civil service.
Yeah.
As I say, there's lots of civil service jobs that need to be created.
But that would make it quite difficult to have anything other than really simple jobs, because you couldn't spend all that time training someone to do something if it's a transitionary job and then they go off and do something else. Does that not lead us back to the kind of the rubbish job situation then?
No, again, I would go back to the point that I made right at the start, which is you would look at that person's skill set and then look at what the needs are in the local community. And both Cameron and I envisage this also as something that would increase subsidiarity in our society, which you and I are both keen on, and I know Cameron is too, that we want to see this controlled at a community council level. We'd like to see our communities more empowered, and would like them to say, we need this done. It's not necessarily something that's urgent, but it would increase the well-being of our local economy, or make people feel happier in this area if perhaps, for example, someone could help build a cycle path here. So we're looking at things that are small infrastructure projects, or there are a host of other things that you could do. Literally you could get people to go and read to elderly people. These are all things that can improve your community, but they're not perhaps absolutely necessary. The absolutely necessary jobs should be existing. That's your civil service.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point.
I want to develop from Kieran's point. She made a point about how Norway public sector employment was about 30%. The Swedish Rhine model, which lasts about 40 years in Sweden, actually had female public employment at 60%. And that basically collapsed, however, when the Confederation of Professional Employees, which is more of your blue sector workers, eventually pushed the kind of social democratic party at the time, and the government at the time, to basically completely ditch the job guarantee aspect of it, which would guarantee job seekers employment after 6 months of seeking it. So there is absolutely, without absolute doubt, that there's room within the public sector to find reasonable jobs, because within the Rhine model, it was union jobs. It was unions who put together these jobs for communities. When it comes to the job guarantee and having crap jobs, I analysed, what sort of jobs we'd be looking for, and I put down basically three policy values and instruments. So it was basically equity, it was cost effectiveness, and human dignity. Now, equity was basically, are we seeing equality within this program? Are we allowing vulnerable groups to actually access these within the barriers we're seeing currently within the private sector? The second one was cost effectiveness. Now, I picked cost effectiveness because usually within governments right now, you use the word efficiency. And efficiency is very often used because it can often mean that you can meet your goals at the cost, though, of giving up values. And that could be you have a job guarantee, but then you take away the human dignity element of the job guarantee, or also actually meeting equality aims. So I put that in there to actually analyse the job guarantee to see if it actually meets these values. And the third part was human dignity. Does the job guarantee actually offer the individual human dignity? And this is usually based on the Scottish Government's wellbeing economy, or as we call WeGo. So would that aspect of the job guarantee meet the WeGo vision which the Scottish Government put forward, which was also largely designed by Professor Joseph Stiglitz? Now, analysing this, the conclusion was all around, yes, it definitely did. And the reason we know this is because models that exist today very clearly show it. We see especially within the Indian model and the Argentinian model, where it was actually designed to help those minority groups. In Argentina, it was designed for young and also disabled and pregnant women, and eventually expanded it to the wider communities. And right now, quite literally millions of Argentinians are actually benefiting from this program, which if you compare to other, case studies and investigations policies, having millions of people in your program has a hefty lot of data and a lot of backup for it. So we know the evidence is there that it heavily works. And all these jobs are designed basically to literally build communities. It's a building communities, but it's building parks, but building centers for like kids to socialize in. And the key part of that as well is, we could talk about, people saying it's shit jobs, but I think the one thing we want to talk about though is that the community aspect, the socialization aspect, because having a job is about taking part in society. It's about building the foundations of the state we want to see, and that requires people to work. But it's also about people coming together to create that vision. And by working together, by speaking to each other, by building these bridges, that is how you do it in the first place. And as Karen pointed out very well, we do want this to be based on a community level. So community councils would absolutely have the vision to determine what sort of jobs they want to see. And they'd work with public sector civil servants, and also work with like experts in different industries, and also a resource management field to discuss how it's all come together. We know this works. We know it's very popular. The only way to do that, though, is to get independence. That's the first key step to doing that.
Absolutely. I'd love to come back to that subsidiarity. We've just got a really good question from Hashbury here. And, I think you covered that, but I think it's a really good question, because for people of kind of my generation and people who've been brought up in this neoliberal world, hey, mate, a job is about doing a job to make something to get paid. That's what a job is, and that's how our society revolves around it. And Hashbury, who I think is round about my age as well, had asked this question. And tell me if you think that's kind of where it comes from. And what you've said is it's just not like that. So would a job guarantee add or subtract to productivity of the economy, or just benefit?
Yes, of course it would add to productivity. So I'll give you an example. For example, me, I am the way I earn money, I am a personal trainer. So, for example, if you have a downturn in the economy, a personal trainer is quite an expensive thing to hire someone as a personal trainer. So if you have someone who's perhaps lost their job, they had a personal trainer, and they say to the personal trainer, sorry, I can't employ you anymore, then, and perhaps, that personal trainer was maybe working in an area where a lot of the same people were unemployed at the same time, then your local council should be able to say, okay, well, we know people in this community who could really do with your help. We could help, some of the elderly people over there, you could help teach them some strengthening, some stretching, all that kind of, they're a really good example of, then you make those people, and I know the science behind this, because I've read up on this, obviously, I've got an anatomical sciences degree, you make elderly people stronger, then they're not going to hospitals so often. So you're not going to burden the hospital system. So people who are perhaps maybe needing an operation faster will get that operation faster. So you can see if you look at it from a wide macroeconomic lens and see the relationships between people, and you can see the chain of events that could happen around that, it's very clear. On a deeply fundamental level, in a successful country, we all need to be doing things for each other and helping each other out.
Absolutely. And it's just that real resource, isn't it? It's using people as a real resource, and it's not leaving them just on the sidelines there. It's actually being used. And we've got a question, Kieran, I just want you, because I think you covered it just briefly earlier. So would a job guarantee include a training guarantee?
That's our thinking. Sorry, I wanted to let Cameron speak because I just said a lot. So
no,
yeah.
that's absolutely fine. I'll be jumping that, and Kieran, please feel free to correct me. But yes, absolutely would. There's absolutely no question about that. Even programs which haven't been fully committed job guarantees have always pretty much included training. And an example I can actually give you is the 2002 Iowa initiative, which basically hired around 100 employees to try and work within the new Tesco. What it basically did was, it said if you complete, now again, there was some issues with this program. It wasn't as expansive as I'd like it to be, and wasn't very optional, and didn't give many those who went forward in the program enough choice. But it did show, though, that they were keen to take part in this program because A, it was a form of social security, and B, they actually had 6 weeks of training to take part in. And that will the kind of skills they would need, and also the employment they need to get into other markets within the economy. And after 6 weeks of training, over 90% of them maintained within that workplace for the medium term, and that's up to about a couple of months to 3 years. And if you're staying within that workplace within 3 years, that's social security for that length amount of time. And that was only a couple of weeks as well. Now, we're envisioning different. Now, we're not talking about Tesco jobs, though, for the job guarantee. As I said, we're trying to build the foundations. And in our first paper, me and Karen basically talked about different ideas. And the first one we talked about was the land of trees. And we basically got that inspiration from Bob McDermott's book, Imagine a Country, Ideas for a Better Future. And that, it was, I can't remember his name, it was a film director at the time, Mark Cousins, that's it. He said that he envisioned Glasgow, for example, building a forest within the actual city, 800,000 pine trees. And he was trying to capture sort of vision of like kind of Canada and Finland, basically, the vast amounts of nature within these kind of like city landscapes. And it's a fantastic idea. And one of his main points was that not only did it improve education, because you're bringing a kid within the Glasgow city area into a forestry area to learn about the kind of the geographical aspects of forestry. It can also build within sort of green domes and foundations of maybe medicine. Also, the idea of having mental health reasons of people accessing that sort of forestry area for escapism. Also, for the idea of housing, but also for air pollution levels as well. Ecological sustainability in a city like Glasgow, and that's the sort of vision we want to see. And the idea of you wake up and you see a forest and you can turn to yourself and go, that was me, I did that with my community around me. We built a forest, we built 800,000 trees in that forest, and the foundation it brought forward and look forward to. Other ideas we also included as well was a nation of art. So what about building art centers, building a culture and really putting it onto the wall for us to see the kind of nation we want to build looking forward, but also bringing local talent as well. Because a lot of people have amazing local talent who never really get to use it, never get that sort of social security within the talent they can bring. Why should they not be rewarded with the talent they have and bring it forward? Because they absolutely have room in society to bring Scots together and to envision that sort of thing we want to see. And also another big aspect as well, which isn't really spoken about enough, but this is what we really want to push forward, was what about rewilding the Scottish Highlands, basically, and taking ownership from a lot of private hands and actually bringing people together to take community ownership and also expanding. For example, the Langholmer site, for example, has absolutely huge scientific value, explaining how different wildlife and also growth life expands there, and how it develops without human interaction, and bringing those environmental goals into community ownership is absolutely vital. So the big key message to anyone who's asking about shit jobs: it will only ever be shit jobs if our vision is shit. But if we can envision something better, envision something that is focused on the social aspects, then you will never have shit jobs. You'll only have a better country.
Yeah. What a great answer, Cameron. Kieran, you got anything to add there?
Yeah, I think I just thought about the idea of the Langholm estate as well. So I said earlier on, really important to keep people in their local communities, especially if they have children at the schools. Their whole, they have friendships. Their children, they have friendships. The adults as well. But equally as well, you could say to someone who's become unemployed and perhaps didn't have all those connections in their community, would you like to help in another community as well? And we can help set you up in another community. They need help with this. And would you be interested in doing this? Just from spending time and finding out what people's interests are, as well as their skill sets as well. So yes, it might be a low skilled job, but if it's someone that thinks, I'd really like to get out of the urban atmosphere, do you have anything, more in a more rural aspect? And we say, yeah, we could help you with that. So, again, it's just down to the limits of our imagination about how we can improve our country and how we utilise our real resource, which is the people of Scotland. They're the really important real resource that we've got, are the people.
Cameron, how much does dignity play a part in this?
Oh, hugely. The whole aspect of, well, first of all, we need to define how to define dignity, and I actually used the Scottish Government's legal definition of human dignity, and basically on the sense that does it actually, well, there's three elements to this. I love this because it breaks it down so very well. So indignity, first of all, the policies that we need to put forward for the job guarantee. First, it needs to actually mitigate the scarring effects of those who are underemployed or unemployed, right? Because those who are in long term often struggle with physical and mental health issues. That's one of the major problems we have right now. So any policy we put forward has to deal with that. And as long as it's social focus on social factors, that would be applied, especially seeing as it's employment which will best match their previous skills. The second is about also updating skills, because one thing we need to remember is labor markets are always developing. There's always new skills, there's always new technology, there's always something coming forward, which will constantly, I mean, you know, we all work, we all get job training once a year, every couple of months, depending which industry we're in. We're always being told about a new program being introduced, a new form of regulations coming forward. We're constantly going forward with that. And as long as the job guarantee continuously updates people on these skills and talents, then that means if they want to transition to the private sector, they're already ready for them. And that means those going into the private sector, employers go, well, you're already trained up, so I'm going to take you in pretty quickly, actually. And the third one is about well-being. And that is basically about colleagues creating a friendly environment. And this is one that already the Scottish Government is trying to build from the public sector. But I think the key thing, and I've mentioned it a lot, so I won't say it too much again, but it's about choice. And basically to create that social relation with colleagues, to create a friendly environment, it's about, one, people coming together to build the vision they see within their community, and two, the kind of vision put together also means that they probably have a lot in common as well. If you have a vision, for example, 800,000 trees in Glasgow, and many people come together who agree on that, they probably also have cross reasons as well to discuss on green policy, on ecological sustainability. And once you create those shared combinations and shared interests, suddenly the social aspect becomes far more stronger. So those are three factors when I talk about human dignity as well. There's also the Equality Act as well, which obviously is already a fundamental part about getting people into there, but that's already being quite enhanced. And if we ever want to push that forward, the job guarantee is absolutely a policy tool to push that forward, to show it in real time working really well.
Brilliant. Kieran, you're standing for election in Aberdeen. So for the SNP, and let's say there was an independent Scotland and a job guarantee scheme. Could you see this type of vision that Cameron's identified and our viewer has identified for Glasgow? What could we do with Aberdeen and the kind of transition away from oil and gas? I mean, what potentials there, marrying what we could do with this, labour force who really wants to take part in that?
Yeah, well, actually, the ward that I'm going forward for is really high unemployment and has some poverty, a number of poverty markers, so, we could do something about that. Absolutely. I mean, I can certainly see, as someone who's gone backwards and forwards to Aberdeen, I could see a lot of things that we could do in Aberdeen. So, yeah, there's no shortage of jobs there. But can I also bring the perspective to this from a female perspective, particularly? So, for me, when I came across this policy, I thought, yeah, I can really see why this is so important. So from a female perspective, generally it's women who are abused by men. I know that's a generalization. But, if they're in a relationship with someone who's violent and they have children, then they're very precarious. And, I think our society has been geared towards precarity. I think many people in government imagine that this precarity creates this pool of unemployment, and then the people in the private sector can always extract from this pool. But that's a nonsense, because that pool that exists very rarely actually fills the private sector with the employees that it wants. And frequently the private sector is actually going to headhunt other people who are employed. So frequently the people who are unemployed for, say, a year, they then find it harder and harder to become employed. So this idea of a pool, that's nonsense. Doesn't work, right? So but coming back to the female perspective, if you know there's a job guarantee and you know that they will provide childcare, you can leave that violent partner. You have that choice. It gives you that choice to do that. And an example, when I was studying at university, I just graduated in 2015. I had to find, I worked as a chambermaid, I worked as a waitress, and one of the jobs that I waitressed, I very quickly realised that the restaurant manager was a psychopath. It turned out that he was stealing from the owners, and he was a very, very nasty man. But you have 3 months you have to find work for when you're doing a degree. Now that there's a whole issue there where why are universities set up this way, where we have a whole 3 months where we're trying to find work. I was lucky. I lived near St Andrews. There's a holiday business there, the industry there. So I was able to find work. That's not going to be the case for everyone. Students should have a job guarantee. If you're going to continue to have these huge breaks, in between year 1, year 2, which I think is wrong-headed for a start. But if you're going to have that, then those students should have a job guarantee. And I should be able to say to the people at the job centre, this man that I'm working for is making my life miserable. And can you help me get something else? Because I want to work, I want to make money, but I don't want to be abused. And, conversely, it could be someone putting their hand up your skirt every day, which is something that you'll know from the Me Too movement is something that women have put up for years and years.
So in a sense, it could get rid of crap jobs because, the job guarantee, rather than offering crap jobs, it could get rid of crap jobs because there is an opportunity for people to move out of jobs that are not happy and are not treated well and have no dignity into jobs that are. I've got a question, Cameron. I'll bring you on to answer this one, but Kieran, if you want to answer it, just let me know. So would there have to be a compulsory element to take a placement with a job guarantee?
Oh God, no. Absolutely not, no. This is it's actually the other way around. When I was looking at, I was making a bottleneck model basically for the job guarantee, and it's something I'm going to put forward in our next paper. I basically was looking at what is the decision-making process in seeking employment, and one of the very first things which demotivate people going for employment is the compliance for seekers, especially those who are within the welfare system who very much rely on social security based on maybe disability, both physical and mental. And the very fact that they have to comply to go through this process, which, by the way, incredibly administrative, by the way, it can take weeks, it can take about a month until you get some sort of reply from any public process, especially if there's DWP involved as well, who are trying to basically screw you from behind with your social security. It's absolutely demotivating and can almost destroy you mentally and physically. And I've seen that personally with colleagues.
Cameron, it's designed like that. That's what it's supposed to do.
It is. Well, I mean, absolutely. And the thing is, as well, is the DWP look at things purely from a spreadsheet and have absolutely no clue about. I mean, I'll tell you one thing right now. I have a colleague who basically went through absolute hell with DWP. Stephen Kerr had to get personally involved because she nearly died. And despite that, Stephen Kerr, after getting involved in this case and knowing the failures of DWP, continued to repeat the progress and the achievements of the policy efficiency. Again, going back to efficiency of the DWP, because you can determine anything with that word efficiency, would actually just disguises the absolute insane suffering which goes on. And again, I don't even want to get into the long administration processes, because that alone people can wait forever. And by the time they get something pops up, you find that quite often people have just completely lost any motivation within it as well. But I'll break it down further. Because again, that was purely from a job seeker's perspective. But if you look at the problems of the employee perspective and the service provider perspective, it becomes absolutely more insane. First of all, if you're a service provider, so you're trying to connect the employer and the seeker together, you work within a competitive environment. That means that you're not going to be sharing information with other service providers as well. That means you're going to be competitive in that entire environment to the point where other sectors will be holding off jobs, because they want to make sure that they're getting the payments, because they get a share percentage of payments from employers to get people involved within that. So it's profit seeking basically. So service providers are basically profit seeking to get people involved. And the second of all, as well, is people who are seeking these sort of jobs, they lack a lot of education when job seeking, because job seeking is actually quite hard. You have to try and match your skills with a lot of industries. Actually, on the front head, you think would match your skills, but actually they seek a lot more skills without your boundaries, or in fact that actually you're overqualified, and actually they're worried that actually in the end you'll be asking for higher bargaining, you'll be asking for a higher pay, and that puts
Cameron, I'll just bring in a comment there from Mandy, which you can see on the screen there. So and that,
yeah.
We know that is the issue. Mandy, thanks so much for sharing that. We really appreciate it. I wonder, Cameron, just with that compulsory element, maybe behind the question was always what happens if the person doesn't take a job? I think that might be where we were getting to on that. Yeah. Do you want to answer that one, and then Kieran, I've got a couple for you from the comments.
Yeah. So in regards to if you don't take a job, you don't take a job. The only thing we actually removed in regards to the savings of the job guarantee modelling we did was job seeker allowance, because the seeking aspect of it was already there. But there's no way in our modelling, there's no way at all that you'll be compliant to find a job and you will not lose any other benefits at all from not seeking a job guarantee. If you don't seek a job, that's absolutely within the job guarantee program. Absolutely fine. It's entirely your choice. In fact, there may be reasons behind the fact that you don't seek a job, and that's not really for the state to push you against anyway. So yeah, absolutely. There's no compliance. It's the other way around. You wouldn't lose any benefits if you're not seeking a job. That's entirely your decision, and it should be fully respected.
Great. Well, Hashbury, hopefully that's answered your question there. A couple of comments, Kieran, I just wanted to highlight to you. Red has said, typical boss. When you were saying your issues that you had earlier. Mandy's got a comment here, which I'll give you a few seconds just to read and then comment on.
Really useful thing. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to bring up as well, I had a friend a few years ago in Glasgow. He'd been long-term unemployed, and they were pushing him in towards working for the Citizens Advice Bureau, and he was completely unsuited to that. He had been a coder, and he was a really smart guy, and I think they thought, really smart guy, will get him to help other people. But he couldn't cope with being in a workplace with lots of people. He needed a job that he could do in a quiet place, and so there was no. This was someone who was actually deeply intelligent and could have really helped people with his particular skill sets, but they just try to make a square peg go into a round hole, and no one gets helped anywhere with that. It's so we need a proper service where people are looking at people's skill sets and saying what's available and trying to match that properly, because that's just not happening.
And I would say, with technology, that's not difficult to do. But the systems that we're using at the moment, as I said earlier, I think they're designed to make this, Mandy, I'm sure you're experiencing this, that everything that they're doing is almost saying to you, look, it's better that you just go and take the worst job imaginable than going through this process. And I think even a whole-scale change in the way that we do benefits wouldn't have any of these extra benefits that the job guarantee would have. I'm really fascinated actually about this idea of the community deciding on the jobs and not the government, the central government saying this. Which one of you two kind of wants to explain that a little bit better and explain why that would be such a benefit to the individual and also to the community?
Well, I just think that it would be, we see the job guarantee idea as a way of increasing subsidiarity. And who better to decide the jobs that need to be done in a community are the people that live in that community. The same way that we want Scottish independence. Who better to run Scotland than people that live in Scotland?
Yeah, I think I'll maybe develop from that, because it's worth also looking at the role beyond the community. And the main thing that's worth pointing out, as Kieran said, it's community-led. So the question is, how do we serve that entire process. So we basically came up with others within Modern Money Scotland, basically 3 bodies that work around the community. So the first one is basically a local employment service. So this is basically going to use the infrastructure of already existing job centres within the public service, basically. And that would basically work as a sort of jobs reserve. So those are basically jobs given on short notice for those who are seeking it, to offer that sort of social security, and basically work within locally. So basically look for local jobs, for local issues that are created. It also wouldn't just be job guarantee jobs, though. Local employment services also offer private sector jobs and public sector jobs within that too. So it's not just going to be just purely for the job guarantee centre, it's going to be for all jobs that are available, because it's also worth having the choice to where you go into. And also as well, it's worth noting as well that we're working with third-party groups. We're working with industry specialists. We're working with people with job developers, counsellors, researchers, auditors, etc., etc. So again, those within the local employment service will be working with the local communities to make the vision happen. The second one is also going to be the kind of regional employment networks. Now, in my mind, these networks would be basically linked, and this is also helped another friend who I've lost his name off the top of my head. We'll link later on. The REM boundaries, basically the regional employment networks, would be linked with the Scottish NHS boards. There's 14 of them basically, so it'll be in line with already existing infrastructure. What they would do basically is they'd work with communities within the region and go, okay, so what are your visions? What kind of stuff do you want? And what we will do is, one, calculate what kind of resources we have. And if we have the resources, where will they come from? How will we move them about from different REN regions, basically, to make it happen? And two, they would also bring experts on board too from certain industries to discuss with those in the community and also with the local employment services. Go, right, so you want to build a local wind farm. Well, I come from wind farm industry, and I can tell you that based on your area, here's how many wind farms you can build. Here's how much it'll probably cost. Here's how many jobs you'll create, and here's how long this project will last. And here's how many long-term jobs you can maybe make if that's something you're seeking. So that's the role of the regional employment network. So regional employment networks gets that data and puts together for those boards and establishes the link between local employment service and communities. And then there's the kind of big agency, there's the Scottish Employment Agency. And that basically is within the overall government programme. That will be on a national level, which will be basically make sure that every single REN, so regional employment networks and local employment service, are meeting their goals, and B, make sure that the accounting that the Scottish Government would give, a sovereign monetary Scottish Government would give, make sure it's enough to meet those jobs. And make sure that those payment schedules are set by the Scottish Employment Agency to make sure that there's no tinkering about from the central bank or the Scottish Government making sure they're not paying enough. They basically set how much labour and the resources are needed, and it also, on a national level, look at the flow of labour. But again, the key thing is that these bodies are looking around the vision of the community level. And they work with third sector groups, the NHS, academic bodies, and one academic body worth mentioning is the Training and Employment Research Unit at Glasgow University. Very key if they were to work with the Scottish Employment Agency. And again, making sure that the community and people's oriented objectives are met. So these 3 bodies serve the community, not the other way around.
Brilliant. Okay, Cameron, I'm going to give you a little break there, and Kieran, I'm going to ask you this one, because that all, you know, I'm taking on a different persona here, but that all sounds fantastic, right? And Kieran has said she's got a brilliant question which I'll put on screen, and I'd like us to Kieran, I'd like you to address that as directly as you can, because that's a really good question to ask, and there's 2 parts to that question. So do you want to kind of break them both down? How much will it cost, and do we need independence for this to work?
So yes, the cost, actually, Cameron probably would give. He'll remember the figures better than I do. But of course, that will fluctuate depending on how successful the private sector is at both retaining people and employing people. So the job guarantee will fluctuate with the success of the private sector. So that's the fundamental thing there. Independence. Yes, we need to have fiscal and monetary sovereignty to really put this into place. Absolutely, yes.
So not just independence, but also our own money? Would this work under?
We're not independent unless we have our own money.
Well, I know we agree with this, but if you're looking at this policy, if we introduce this under kind of sterlingization or under devolution to an extent, would this work without our own money being monetary sovereign?
I think, Cameron and I both brought the policy to conference that we would have a pilot, because we recognise that it will require money, and the Scottish government is currency limited.
Okay, Cameron, on the cost then.
Okay, so
You've got the stats in hand.
I'm going to try and find a massive question, but here's what I remember top of my head, basically, for stats. First of all, on a basic point, for developed countries, all costs calculated from a small developed country to a big country like the US have always ranged between 1 to 3% of GDP. And that's been calculated multiple times, and it's done especially by Bill Mitchell as well. He's done a whole book on like the fall of full employment from a policy perspective. So that's how he's calculated. And that's what I'd recommend, first of all. So what we did was, when we were doing the modelling, because labour market data has been massively skewed by COVID-19, especially when furlough was almost ended by UK government in 2021 in September, labour market fluctuations are massive. So it was really hard to calculate that based on that. So what we did was, based on this paper, because I was also trying to compare those costs of UBI as well, we based on 2019 figures. And basically from what I remember putting together was, at the time, pre-pandemic, we had about 96,000 people who were underemployed. If those who don't know what underemployed is, it's those who effectively are working. They're in a job, they're getting paid, but it's not work they enjoy. It's not an industry that they are actually part of, or doesn't meet their skills.
Was that in Scotland, 96,000?
That's in Scotland. So all the data I'm referencing now is Scottish specific, basically. So that's 96,000 people underemployed in 2019. And on top of that, you had about 211,000 people as well who were basically unemployed, full up unemployed, basically. So that's 96,000 people who were underemployed and 211,000 people who are unemployed. So in total, that gives you overall, in terms of a 90% participation rate in the job guarantee, we have about 286,000 people taking part. That's our assumptions. We're assuming 90% people will take part. But again, as Kieran has pointed out, if only 50% people get involved, then the cost will be in scale 50%. So actually, the more people take involved, the more expensive it is, but less people get involved, the least expensive it is. Now, on that point, we had the idea of paying people £9.50 an hour. So £9.50 an hour, just above at the time of the living wage was £9.30, because we want to go above that as well. So that means that if we're paying that wage with that amount of people, overall we are paying just about, in terms of those who are unemployed, 1.5 billion, and for those who are underemployed, 3.07 billion pounds. So that overall is a cost of 4.6 billion. Now, that figure of 4.06 billion, which is at the time 2.2% of GDP, it also takes two returns in. Those two returns are scrapping job seekers allowance, because we're no longer seeking jobs because the jobs are reserved there that we provided. That saves at the time £172 million. And then the increased tax returns and national insurance, and we're not talking about the scandalous criminal tax and national insurance hikes we're getting in Westminster. We're talking about previous rates, as we'll get just now. That's about £500 million. So I think at the time it was like £580 million basically at the time. Now, we also want to be aware that there's infrastructure costs. So we put £164 million in there too. And also, there's also a increase in GDP, and that is just about 0.5%, but also in GVA, which is a big part of the WeGo economy, because we're talking about the actual increase in terms of gross value added. That's about $500,000 as well, just over half. I think it's like £600 million. So a lot of numbers there, but in total, that would cost, in 2019 figures, £4 billion. £4 billion to basically help reach full employment as a service and to offer social security to those who need it, to quite literally hundreds of thousands of Scots. And that £4 billion, you may think, is actually that big, and it really isn't, because 2.2% of GDP. And that is equivalent to what you get right now in Westminster when it comes to their vast amount of military spending. So they can spend it on the military industry. Where actually, why don't you spend on actually getting people employed and having a socially inclusive form of employment that meets their community needs, basically. So overall, it's insignificant compared to the social gains you have.
Yeah, and that's the point that I wanted to make is that you've had a stab at the net cost, and all too often we talk about the cost of something. The cost of this would be 5 billion, but we don't look at the net costs, which are what are all the benefits. And you've taken out some of those, but over a longer term, we would be looking at the impact that this has made in the communities in terms of well-being and also people's health and their happiness. And these are all the things that have really got to be calculated when we're looking at an actual cost, because it's really easy to calculate the monetary cost, but when we don't look at the net benefits and get that net cost. So overall, you could say actually over our medium term, this would actually not be costing us anything at all to kind of provide this dignity to these people.
Absolutely. And I'll be very quick, Karen. The one thing about our model assumed everybody will be working full time. But in actuality, and as Karen pointed out earlier as well, students are going to work full time because they actually have an education they need to focus on. And actually, if a large percentage of those who are getting involved in employment are actually working part time, suddenly that 4%, the £4 billion figure, or the 2.2% figure of GDP cost, actually goes down quite significantly. It's hard to assume how much of that would be in terms of part-time employment, so we just went for a more conservative cost of full-time. So actually, we can't really be accused of actually underestimating the cost, because actually we're assuming everyone's working full-time as well. So honestly, in my personal opinion, it'd be less than 4 billion and less than 2.2%. But Karen, I'll let you go to the point you're trying to make there.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that, earlier on, I gave that example of a personal trainer who become unemployed and the wider macroeconomic effects of them perhaps helping in an elderly people's home and how that would, but then flip that on its other side is, if that personal trainer is then staying at home, not doing anything, then feeling depressed because they're not having contact with other people, because generally we're pretty social creatures. We need to be with other people most of the time. Not everyone, but the vast majority of people. So that in and of itself, again, is another cost saving for the state. Because again, what I really want to emphasize as well, countries are not businesses, and businesses are not always working for the benefit of a country. If you're in government, you've got to be working for the benefit of the country, and we've got to make sure that every citizen is as fulfilled as they can be. They're also contributing to society as much as they can do, in the best way that's right for them and for society.
I've learned a lot tonight, because this isn't an area I've looked in detail. I really like the kind of macroeconomic element of this, in the sense that we're taking away monetary injections of money into the economy. We're not buying bonds, we're not printing money. We're actually saying to people, it's through a fiscal stimulus. If we want 4 billion into the economy, we're going to pay people money, meaningful jobs. It's going to people who are probably towards the lower end of the income bracket to a large degree. Whereas another way of injecting money into the economy is to inflate assets and push that money into the economy, who are the wealthiest in the economy. So this type of approach is a brilliant way of injecting money into the economy to not only the people who will use it, but fundamentally the people who need it. So I think there's so many kind of layers to this policy. I'd like to finish with just where are we likely to be now that we've had this trial agreed at conference, and let's imagine, hopefully it's not too far a step for us all to imagine, that we're independent in a couple of years' time. Where does this policy move, and what impact does it have? Which one of you wants to start that, and then I'll make sure the other person has a chance to finish.
Karen, you go first.
Well, I'm just going to say that, Cameron is still working on the second part of this, and really that's how we're going to make it actually really happen. So, if I'm elected, then, I'm going to be back, working with Cameron and thinking about how we could actually make this happen. What do you think, Cameron?
I think you just nailed it. as much as I can sit here and throw numbers at you and throw policy theories and goals at you, actually, it's only going to work if we actually get so many different people from different industries, different backgrounds, different groups to come together and actually say, you know what, hey, I've got an idea about how this could work because I've had this experience, and go, actually, I've got concern, but actually, from my perspective, here's how you can maybe fix that concern. And it's about people coming together, and hopefully, you know, after the May elections, me and Karen will be fighting where it will happen. Will it happen in Stirling or will it happen in Aberdeen? And I hope it happens in Stirling, so I'll be fighting Karen to make that happen here. But as Karen says, people like Karen as well, and politicians who are really seeking not full employability, but full employment, those who are seeking those policies, we need to get on the stage. And then we need to connect them with grassroots movements and also with industry experts and communities and put it all together. That's how you do it. It's about building a stage for absolutely everyone to create that platform. And honestly, what excites me, I'm going to go a bit nerdy again. In policy and theory, we have this thing called the window of opportunity. So how much of an opportunity exists to make this policy happen? When it comes to comparing two legislators, Westminster and Holyrood, the window of opportunity theory very clearly shows that for progressive policies, the foundation of that is far more likely to happen, not just in Holyrood as a whole, but within independent Scotland, with the way our democratic structures work in terms of getting people together and discussing different motions, discussing different conferences, and getting people to put through legislation, compared to what we have, a very regressive, very backwards, and almost at the very same centralized, I'm not going to say dictatorship, I'm not going to exaggerate, but heavily centralized parliament down south that is very, very, very quickly marginalizing big parts of our society. So there's two things to it, to overall. It's getting independence, and it's also bringing communities together with everyone to build it as one country.
And that's great. Really, really good summary from both of you. I think policies like this are incredibly important because they're the way that we can show that an independent Scotland will be different from what we have at the moment. And my kind of continual concern is that when we become independent, we just become this Westminster, this London, UK light. And I think we need policies like this that say, not only is this a really good idea, but this could not happen under the current structure, not just economic, but political structure. So I think there's a huge importance on this as a policy. And I think Kieran and I have been really lucky, Cameron, you were able to join us for this. I'll see if there's any final comments. Yeah, we've just got a couple of comments there around I think just how difficult things are at the moment. Thanks so much for joining us, Cameron. Until next week, when we have our next episode of our Small Nation series, and we're looking at Wales. And I'm definitely going to ask a question now. I won't go before you finish, Kieran. I'm definitely going to ask a question about the job guarantee to our audience, to our two professors next week who are speaking about the Welsh economy. Kieran, do you want to finish us off?
There's something quite important that I just want to say before we finish, is that there has been a survey on this as a policy, and it's incredibly popular both across the right and the left. So if there's a policy that can help Scottish independence happen, we think it's this one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Cameron, for joining us.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, that must have been nice for you, Kieran, to get one of your policy mates on the show.
Yeah. I'm in the P&J again today.
Depression Journal in the northeast. Yeah, we're lucky to get a hold of you as well, considering how much coverage you're getting at the moment. Thanks for joining us. Please do share and join us on Patreon if you can. And we've also got the SCOTONOMICS.scot website where we've got some other information and some blog posts as well. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. One of my favourite episodes because I learned absolutely loads about something I know you're really passionate about, Kieran. So that was really good for me. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Until next week, thanks very much.